Hey guys! So today I thought we would talk a little bit about research for comp titles. And I apologise if it's a little bit noisy. The park was super busy today, so the only spot I was able to find is really close to the road. However, as a new author, what do you need to know about comp titles? I guess the best place to start is what even is a comp title. So it's short for a comparative title or a comparison title, and basically they're books or other media that are similar to your own work. So if you were trying to describe your book to someone, it makes it easier to say, well, it's kind of like this other book. It just gives them an idea of what to expect, and it really helps provide some sort of reference for your work for like agents, editors, publishers. It kind of lets them know like the sort of tone to expect, where it would be in the market, that kind of thing. And we'll go into all that in a bit more detail here. Why do we need comp titles? Great question, I'm glad you asked. Comp titles help people get a better understanding of your book, and the best way that I can describe it is think of the horror genre. So say I was writing a horror book and I was giving it to an agent, and I just said, I'm writing this great horror novel, and here's a rough idea of it, a little bit of the story. A horror novel could be a lot of different things, guys. So there's a big difference between R.L. Stine's Goosebumps books, which are a horror, even though they're for kids, compared to a Stephen King or like a James Herbert horror book, right? Those are for very different target audiences, and they're going to appeal to very different agents, publishers, readership. So you want to make sure that to give your book its best chance, you're explaining it to agents and publishing houses with a good comp title that will show roughly what it is that you're aiming to achieve. It helps them understand how marketable your book is. If other books that are similar to yours are doing really well in the market just now, they're more likely to be interested in yours because they know that those books are a goldmine at the moment. And with books, you'll see things tend to come and go in phases. For a while, I'm sure there was a big thing on vampire books, after the Twilight series. Right now, romantasy is a huge thing. So different things come and go, and letting your agent know using comp titles how profitable your book could be is definitely a good thing. Another example that I wanted to give is, imagine instead of a romantasy, say you're writing a romance book, but it's also kind of a horror. You've got both aspects in it. Where do you market it in a shop? Do you put it on the bookshelf in Barnes & Noble beside all the romances, and then a romance reader comes along, reads it and is horrified because it's scary? Or do you put it beside the horror novels and a horror reader comes along and reads it and is disgusted because it's a romance? If you have a comp title that shows a similar book that's maybe blended horror and romance, the agents, publishing houses, they can see how it was marketed, and if it worked well, then they're going to do the same thing. They're going to put it in the same shelf in Barnes & Noble. They're going to target the same readership that enjoyed it. Makes it easier for everyone if something's been done to some extent before and they can follow tried and tested methods of promoting it. What can we learn from comp titles? Well, they can teach us a lot of useful information, actually. For example, they could highlight that you're not quite in the genre or the subgenre that you thought you were. So for instance, I had found a comparative title. It was actually a film, which we'll go into later, if you can use films and TV series and other media as part of your comps when you're querying. But yeah, I had found a film and it touted itself as an eco horror, and I was like, this is some of the storyline, certain aspects are very similar to my book. It has water contamination in a small village and all hell breaks loose. Yeah, my book must be an eco horror, right? After researching more comp titles and finding more books that have similar aspects, not necessarily those exact aspects, but different similar aspects. One that is a really close comp is actually from James Patterson, who is a household name author-wise. The book that would be comparative to mine, it was actually touted as an eco-thriller. Now that really threw me for a loop. I hadn't heard the term eco-thriller before, and it obviously, with it being James Patterson, it was very marketable, it was very successful. That would be a better subgenre to try and place myself into, rather than one that is eco-horror based on one obscure film that's not really giving the agents an idea of where to place me. Doing a little bit more research was actually quite a big learning curve for me in discovering how to market my book. Sorry, there's a squirrel over there. Hi friend, I don't have anything for you. So as well as using your comp titles to help your agent or your publishing house to decide how to market your book, it also helps us learn how to market our book to find an agent, to find the right agent, the appropriate agent that is familiar with the genre that we're working in. They've already had success in that genre. Instead of sending out blasts and blasts of query letters to hundreds of agents, everyone that we can find online that may not really have a great interest in the type of book that you're writing, if you can find comp titles and discover what agents and agencies those authors used, instantly you've got a head start. So now, instead of querying random agents that might not be interested, you can query an agent and say, hey, I'm doing a book that's similar to this one that you were involved in, and here's how, here's a little bit more information. And straight away, if you are writing to them with your query and you're mentioning a book that they were involved in, that's going to give them a little bit more interest than if you were using competitive titles that they'd never heard of or ones that are overused. It kind of helps show that you've done your research and that you are serious and you're not just, needing to go in the slush pile and wasting their time. So what makes a good comp title? How do you decide if the comp title that you're thinking of using is the right one to use? Well, that can be tricky, right? On one hand, you want a really successful comp title to compare your book to. So you're showing the agent like, hey, I could be really, really successful. I could be like the next Harry Potter. However, after a while, those highly, highly successful books can be used in so many query letters that the agents are they're sick to death of hearing it. I think it was it Lucinda Halpern? Yes, so I believe it was Lucinda Halpern. I can't remember if it was a YouTube video that has seen her in or if it was from her book. Her book is called Get Signed, Find an Agent, Land a Deal and Become a Published Author. But she had said that Harry Potter, I think she'd seen hundreds upon hundreds of query letters that had come in since Harry Potter with all its fame, people using that as a comp title, and it just starts to lose impact, right? So great, your book is like the next Harry Potter, but Harry Potter has already been done, so it's different. You need a differentiator too. For example, you could still use the really wildly successful, Harry Potter. Say it's like the perfect comp title and you really can't see a way around that. We also need to add something else to show your unique story. So imagine you could say, I'm writing a book that is a blend of Harry Potter and The Little Mermaid, where everything is underwater, including the magic school. So straight away, you're showing how different it is, but which aspects make it similar. And those are the kind of things that you want to be able to do with your comp title. You want to show how marketable it can be, but also why it's unique. It's not just a carbon copy. You really want to show an agent your unique offering. The next big question is, how do you find comp titles? That's the big question, isn't it? It's all well and great saying, okay, I know what a good comp title is. I understand why I need them, but how do I find one? That can take some time. One of the best ways to find comp titles is to read in your genre, and I'm sure you've heard that a million times before. And it can be hard if you're not sure, if you're straddling a couple of different genres or subgenres. It can be difficult to decide where to start. For instance, and I'll show you here on screen, I knew when I started writing that my book had ecological themes. I wasn't sure if it was going to be a thriller or a horror based on a couple of different comps that I'd seen out in the wild. Knowing that the ecological factor was something that was there regardless of what other subgenre it falls into. If you search ecological novels, it brings up a list of different things. Now, they may not be anywhere near what you want, but what you will find is that there's always going to be a lot of listicles. So list articles that are filled with different ecological books. So here's leaf the reader's 15 best eco-fiction novels, and from there you can get a little bit of a blurb, an understanding of what sort of themes are in these books, and if one feels like it might have some similarities, either in voice, in the themes, in the plot, then go ahead and give it a read. And one thing that you'll find is some of these listicles, they'll be totally different from each other. So for ecological book is not going to be the same as everyone else's. You might find some overlap, and that's when you're going to start to realize, okay, so maybe this one's a little bit more popular than that one. You'll start to see the same titles and learn which ones are successful and have done well. Now, moving on, another thing that you can do is have a little look around your local bookshop. So I had walked into Barnes & Noble one day and there was a book on the shelf and it just drew me straight to it from the cover. It had a gorgeous, almost kind of Scottish looking scenery on the front of a wild sea, and it was called Wild Dark Shore by Charlotte McConaughey, and it's a new title, so it was just in the front of the bookstore. I hadn't planned on buying it, but I looked at it and I was like, I just know this is going to be something that would be a good comparative title to me. So I had a look at the blurb, decided yes, this, as an author, Charlotte McConaughey does write a lot of eco-fiction. She covers a lot of different eco-themes, and I found out she has actually written a book called Once There Were Wolves, and it's based in Scotland. She's an Australian author, but absolutely loved discovering her. I hadn't heard of her before, and it just shows like one little trip to the bookshop can really change the trajectory of your understanding of things, and different authors in your genre that you might not have come across. That's always worth a go. And then once you have found a book or two in your genre, another thing that you can do is go to Goodreads. So when you go to Goodreads, you can browse for certain things. So for example, if we go to all genres, you can see there's a list of different genres. So if you have some sort of an idea, you've maybe found like one or two comparative titles, but nothing's really feeling perfect, you can go and you can have a look. Let's see. So say for instance, you were writing some science fiction. It's going to give you a bunch of nice new releases in science fiction. If you hover over them, you are going to get a little bit of a blurb, so you can straight away, without having to buy books or go to their library, you can have a look and see if it is something that would be worthwhile you reading. Within science fiction, you've also got, near future, planetary romance, space opera, apocalyptic, all these different subgenres that you can dip into. So time travel, so you've got a time travel book, and then now we've got a bunch of new releases that are tagged as time travel. So that is a really good way of finding even more books that could be comp titles for you. And once you have them, so say for example, we click on the Book of Records here by Madeline Thane. You can see the different tags that people have tagged her with: science fiction, magical realism, fantasy, historical fiction. So those are all giving you clues as, if you think the Book of Records is going to be a good comp title for you, you've got all these different genres that people have tagged her in. So you could start exploring those too. And if you go down here, it'll tell you readers also enjoyed, and you can find a bunch of books. They may or may not be similar. I've had mixed luck with this, but it will show you different books which might actually be really great comp titles. So that is another way to find more comp titles for you. Now we'll go and we'll discuss something that I think a lot of us wonder, and that is if you can use film or TV or other media as comp titles. And I have done a good bit of research on this topic. Like I say, the first comp title that I found that felt like there was a real connection to my book, it was a movie, and it wasn't some blockbuster hit, and it was a little bit older, but the plot followed a similar trajectory to my own, which I just loved. I did a bit of research to discover if I should or should not use that in the future as a comp. Everything that I've read on the subject says it depends. I'm sorry, there's like lawnmowers and everything going around. I really hope that it's not super noisy. Hopefully the mic is doing a good job of keeping all that out. So everything I've read on the subject says it depends, right? If you have a really strong reason for using some different kind of media that's not a book as a comp, you really have to have a strong reason, and you need to showcase that in your query letter. You really don't want to only use different media. With any query letter, 2 comp titles are usually pretty sufficient. So if you do have one that's a film or a TV show, you want the second comp to definitely be a book to balance that out. If you are using TV or other media as one of your comp titles, you want to make sure that the book that you're using as your secondary comp title is strong. Now, for me, I had found that movie, like I said, it had similar aspects to the plot. It was the only thing I'd ever seen that had similar aspects to the plot of my book, which I was just so stoked to find because I was really struggling. I wasn't writing from a particular trope or anything like that, so I was absolutely pumped to find that movie. And then I found, after a lot of research, it didn't come easily. There's no cheat code, right? I found the James Patterson book that had similarities to my book as well in a different way. And I thought, this is great. I can use the movie for these aspects of the plot, and I can use this James Patterson book for these other aspects. And that's a really great comp situation, right? Wrong. Both the book and James Patterson's novel came out in 2012 or something. They're really quite old, and if I had gone ahead and used those in a query letter to an agent, chances are they were going to look at that, and regardless of how successful the James Patterson novel was, they're going to be like, people might have been interested in 2012, honey, but I can't see any evidence that they are now, right? So you really want to also make sure that whatever comp titles you're using are relevant now. And at the end of the day, an agent only gets paid if they sell your book. So they want to know that they have the best possible chance of selling it. And to do that, that's your job. You have to show them that your book is sellable. And it's sellable in today's market, not the market of 2012. Times have changed. And like I said earlier in the video, there are phases when it comes to book popularity. And that's not to say that you can't use an older title. If an older title is going to be a really good comp for your book, absolutely use it. But then as the second comp, you really want to have something that is more modern, right, to balance it out. So know your comp's strengths and weaknesses. If one is weak because it's a different form of media, it's not a book, then balance it with a book. If one is weak because it's a great comp, but maybe it wasn't super successful, maybe it only sold a few, 1,000 books, but it's really just such a great comp, then go ahead and pair that with a highly successful comp that's maybe it's not quite as close a fit, but it's more widely known, and there is certain aspects that you can compare to your own. Now, how do you remember all these different books that you're reading, all these different comp titles that you're finding? What can you do? When I come across a book that I want to read, I will go to Goodreads and I will add it to my want to read list. And in here I've got a list of all these different books that I've found at various times in various different ways that would make really good comp titles, and I pop them here so that I don't forget them and I can go back to them later and read them and continue on with my research. Now, once I've read them, I pop them into this spreadsheet here. What I have been jotting down here is some really interesting research. So I have the book title and when it was released. So this is going to give me a really quick and clear way to have a look and see which comp titles are more modern and are going to, maybe perform better for showing current market trend of interest to a potential agent, and also which ones are older and might need backed up by something a little bit newer. I have the author's name here and whether or not it was their debut. A lot of them it wasn't, but I did find one that it was their debut novel, and it was awesome, by an English lady. I do love when I see other Brits being successful. And what I've done is I've taken some of the top genre tags that those books have in Goodreads, and I have added them in here. And what I was surprised to learn is that there's a lot of sci-fi tags in these ecological books, because normally, I would have said, yeah, sure, speculative fiction. I just wouldn't have necessarily pinned sci-fi, but it's definitely something for me to consider. There's lots of thriller, as well as some horror, dystopian, and even this one here I read, it's highly successful, but it was a middle grade book. That's not my target market. I'm definitely wanting to write an adult book, but it's still interesting to see this, right? Then I have their agents. I just found this either in the acknowledgements section when I've read a book. A lot of times authors will call it their agent, and from there I've been able to find the agency. If not, Google is your best friend. Like, for instance, the Terraformers, after I read that, my library I guess dropped the license for the ebook, and when I went to download it again to find the agent to add in here, it was gone. I can't get it back, and I've already read it, so I'm not going to spend the money to buy the book. I did find her agency with Google. I just don't know which agent in particular at the agency Annalee Newitz uses. And then from there, obviously, this might not be something that concerns you too much, but because I am a Brit and I live in America, I wanted to know both publishing houses for the UK and the USA, if the books have been released in both. So this has been really interesting seeing which publishers have taken them in different parts of the world. Now, for instance, Tender is the Flesh, I do have the USA one here. She was originally published oh gosh, which country was it? I think it's in South America somewhere. I haven't added that here because right now I'm not even thinking about translations and getting my book published in different countries other than the UK and the USA. That is my initial goals. I've also added here whether or not it was a New York Times bestseller and a rough sales volume. It's not always easy to find that information, but sometimes I've just gone with, there's 1,600 ratings on Goodreads, so they've obviously sold thousands of books. It might be more. Not everyone goes on Goodreads and rates, right? Other times you can Google it and it'll give you an estimate. For example, this middle grade book, Fuzzy Mud, by Louise Sachar, it's actually sold millions. It's sold 9 million books. Can you believe that? Another thing that I was curious to see, more as a sign of whether or not something was successful, it's not something that I'm necessarily trying to do, is get a TV or film adaptation, but it does show how successful a book has been, right? And there's a bunch of them that have TV series and films that are being produced or have been produced, which is really interesting. And then I've got some other notes here. So for example, Neil Stephenson that wrote Termination Shock, I discovered he has a cult following. I had no idea. I hadn't read him before I read that book. Different places where some of the books were mentioned. Different things like Time magazine. You know what I'm trying to say. Book of the Year, Amazon's Best Fiction Book of the Year 2020, Reese's Book Club Selection, Good Reader's Choice Award. So these are things that I just want to remember when it comes time to market my book. Like, I might not have thought of all these different awards and things. It's definitely something to, I don't know how you get in about them, but it's something I would talk to a PR team about if I did get a publisher. So yeah, this is everything I have on comp titles, and I hope you find it interesting. I work in marketing, so doing all this kind of competitive analysis and seeing what has worked and hasn't worked, and so I hope this was interesting. I wanted to go over just some of the stuff I've been doing. I am not ready to query yet, but I just want to be prepared when it is time. And having all of this competitive knowledge that I can use in a query letter, I will be able to adjust my query based on the agents, the agency. If someone's more interested in sci-fi and thrillers, then I'll maybe use one of the comp titles that's labelled as such. And if someone is more interested in horror, then maybe I'll go ahead and use a comp title that's labelled more towards the horror. And just trying to make sure that everything is as tailored to the specific agent that I'm reaching out to as possible. Anyway, I hope that was helpful for you guys. If so, please leave me a little comment down below and let me know. And take care. I'll see you next time. Bye.